Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Logan. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Provincial Cancer Agencies, which you'll hear referred to as CAPCA for the duration of the call. It's in that capacity, it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the webinar. I really thank you for making the time to join us today. The goal of the webinar today is to brief participants on a core set of activities that we're leading at CAPCA in partnership with our national partners. Obviously in close collaboration with CADIS and PCODER and PCPA. Collectively, this work is being called the Pan-Canadian Cancer Drug Funding Sustainability Initiative. We will be outlining at the end of the process an intensive consultation process that we're starting today and that extends through to March. And we really strongly encourage you to participate in that process as you feel you're able to. This webinar is going to begin with a formal presentation from Dr. Michael Shearer. Dr. Shearer is the President and CEO of Cancer Care Ontario. He's also the Chair of the CAPCA Board of Directors. We're joined here today with several of our national partners, CADIS, PCODER, PCPA, as well as almost 200 participants from across Canada in almost every province of the country, from the pharmaceutical industry, patient advocacy groups, as well as a number of cancer specialists, cancer clinicians. After the presentation from Michael, I'll moderate a question and answer period. We're happy to receive questions throughout the webinar. In order to do so, you should post a question in the GoToMeeting site. We will monitor those in real time. We'll theme them and then select a number of them, time permitting, that will allow us to address as many of those themes as is possible. We'll share today's slides and a recording of the webinar online on GoToMeeting, so all of you who have registered will automatically get a link in the next 48 hours with that information. We will also have a dedicated survey that goes out that will allow you to continue to ask questions over the next couple of weeks, and we would encourage you to post those questions through that process. Before turning the microphone over to Michael, for those of you in the room who may not know much about the Canadian Association of Provincial Cancer Agencies, I'd like to give you a little bit of additional background. So this again just tells you who's in the room. The two principals from Sontis Health who are here and help to manage this consultation process are with us and are named on slide 2. So the Canadian Association of Provincial Cancer Agencies is an interprovincial association that was established by the provinces to support the provinces. All of our funding comes directly from provincial cancer programs. We are the only mechanism that exists in Canada to bring the leaders of Canada's provincial cancer programs together to talk about the delivery of cancer care and to talk about the implementation-related issues. We come together to address common challenges and opportunities to enhance and strengthen the delivery of cancer care across the country and to provide a way for the leaders of Canada's system to come together and learn from, share, talk about, and address things in a collaborative forum so we can start together in a better place. Our members and our partners are diverse. We have members from every province from across Canada, from British Columbia to Newfoundland. And in each province, the most senior person responsible for that delivery of cancer care or for the organization that the Ministry of Health has established to advise them on cancer care is on our board of directors. You will see the institutions named by province and the most senior person who sits on the CAPCA board of directors. We also work with a number of national partners, including the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies and Health, otherwise which I've referred to as CADIS, and its Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review, or PCODER. We work closely with the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, PCPA, and also with the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer, some of whose work you'll hear about in today's webinar. And finally, we have other partners we work with, for example, on the safety side of cancer care delivery, such as the Institute for Safe Medication Practices and the Canadian Patient Safety Institute. But for today, the partners listed are those that we work with that are specific to the drug review, evaluation, and pricing system. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to hand it over to Michael.
Great. Thank you very much, Heather, and welcome to everybody on the webinar. Thank you for taking some time today to hear about the work that we're undertaking, because your input to that work is going to be tremendously important. And just thanks to CADIS and the team here for hosting us for this webinar today. So thank you very much for that. You see the agenda there. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because I want to make sure that we have lots of time for questions and discussion. And as Heather said, there'll be opportunity for engagement and feedback throughout the process beyond today, but we want to answer as many questions as we can that come up today. I'm going to just talk a little bit about how we're organized across the country today with respect to the cancer drug system, talk a little bit about the current and future challenges that we face and why the need for this work. I'll talk then about the initiatives that we're undertaking at the moment to strengthen that process for the provinces. And finally, a little bit at the end, which I'll hand back to Heather in terms of the next steps of the engagement process. So briefly, and at quite a high level, you see on the slide there how we're organized today with respect to a process for the approval of new cancer drugs in our provincial cancer systems across the country, starting with Health Canada through a set of review processes, and we have two in the country that are central. One is through the PCODA process, which CADIS hosts for all the provinces, and then INES in Quebec providing a similar set of advice-based and recommendations based on evaluation for the province of Quebec. Once those recommendations come forward, as you know, then there's a process that we've also agreed to engage nationally on across the provinces, which is the Pan-Canadian Pricing Alliance, which is the work to start to work with industry around the negotiation of prices. And then, of course, the final decisions resting with the provinces for the implementation of those drugs for those indications at that price that's been agreed upon. All of that, of course, resting with the provinces to implement, but with the aim, of course, that we have a good level of consistency in the implementation of these new drugs across the country. That system, has evolved over the years, and I think has some tremendous strength that we have in place already. The first of which is that I think both the processes that CADIS are providing for this whole process and INES in terms of excellent recommendations based on evaluation of the effectiveness of drugs and looking at the cost effectiveness issue as well. And also, subsequent to that, this agreement to go to a more harmonized and kind of central process for negotiations through the PCPA and the issues of then the approval for those indications across the provinces. So we've laid down together, and appreciate everyone's participation in that, some really effective ways that we can manage the opportunity that we have with new therapies arriving for cancer patients across the country, which is absolutely terrific. What we do know, though, is that despite all of that work, we still face a tremendous challenge around the sustainability of our approach to being able to provide new and effective therapies for cancer patients across the country. Some of the things that you would see in that whole process, which we've looked at across the cancer agencies and with our partners, that may be opportunities to strengthen this process, and I'll talk about the broader challenge in a little bit, are the way in which we approach this opportunity and this challenge that we face. One of them is that we, as you know, we look at each drug, and largely each drug and indication, in isolation with respect to its effectiveness and looking at the cost effectiveness issues. We don't look at them largely in this whole process in the context of the broad environment of therapies existing and new that are available for cancer patients across the country. And the second kind of major thing that one would notice is that once we've made those decisions based often on trial evidence, but with consensus expert opinion weighing in on the value of that evidence. We don't do a lot of work to check whether those drugs are providing the value that we expect in the general population. And as you're probably aware, this isn't done to a great extent in any jurisdiction. And in fact, all of the things that I'm going to talk about today are not really just Canadian challenges. They're challenges across the world. So the things that we're talking about today are issues in many jurisdictions. So given that, and given, of course, the high cost of many of the new drugs, we, as cancer program leaders, looked at this challenge and really asked the question as to how we can make sure that we are able to provide opportunities sustainably into the future for patients and families to have access to the most effective and highest value therapies that are available, given that challenge. And what does that challenge look like? I'm going to go into that a little bit now. And this is in the context of of course, a problem on the need side, which is largely driven by demographics in terms of health spending, and in particular cancer care spending. But if one just looks at healthcare spending generally, we know that for quite some time, the rate of growth of healthcare spending has been rising faster than the general economy. It's kind of leveled out a little bit over the last 2 or 3 years, but generally over a period of many years, that the challenge of a sustainable healthcare system is a pressure that is there and only continuing to increase. And if we look at cancer care and cancer drugs in particular, we know that in cancer programs across the country, that this challenge of meeting the need for cancer drugs is the fastest growing challenge that we face in all of the cancer programs. And it's driven by tremendous opportunity. We've got many new cancer therapies and indications in the pipeline based on innovation and new research. That's terrific. And as I say, we know that the demographic means that the need on the patient and family side is only going to grow for a couple of reasons. One, the demographics in terms of the incidence of cancer, but also as we do better and better in treating cancer, and more patients are living longer, which is great. That their need for care, of course, continues, and the need for new therapies continues. So all of that has meant that we've had a rapidly rising cancer drug budgets across the country, double-digit increases year over year. And as far as one can see, given the environment and the pipeline and the demographics, this is only going to continue and mounts a serious challenge, of course, to our ability to deliver these new and effective therapies in a timely way to cancer patients. So this graph just shows that activity with respect to cancer research is higher than most other areas of healthcare, that the pipeline with respect to cancer is generating more opportunities than in other areas. And if one looks year over year, one can see that the number in that pipeline is also increasing with time. And so we need a strong way of responding to this opportunity for patients across the country. Next slide just shows that on the demographic side with respect to the need, and this is the average annual new cases, both up to 2012 in terms of, I think it's 2012, and the projections after that that are expected, very predictable based on the demographics. And as I say, this is only part of the issue, because as survival rates increase, the prevalence of people living with a diagnosis with cancer is going up at an even higher rate than this, and all of the care that those patients require. Next one, I've just given an example there, but this is common across the country. It's common in many jurisdictions. That's the graph for the new spending in Ontario based on submitted claims. So this is actual expenditures. These aren't budgets. These are actual expenditures for cancer drugs in the new drug funding program in Ontario. And apart from a leveling off in 11-12, a very high rate of growth in terms of the funding required and the resources required to meet that opportunity and that pipeline of activity. So given that challenge, and I think reflecting on how we're structured today and all of the good things that we do have in place, we at CAPCA and with partners have looked to see how we can strengthen this approach so that it more effectively meets the needs of provinces, meets the needs of patients and families in those provinces, and the ability of the economy to support this opportunity for cancer patients. And so the goals, quite simply, to contribute more strongly to the sustainability of the cancer drug system for all Canadians, and to improve access to high-quality, evidence-based cancer drugs for all patients. So CAPCA has taken on this challenge across the cancer programs and the cancer program leaders across the country, but this is in coordination with the provinces, the ministries of health, and the engagement of all of the leaders across the country who have the ultimate job, of course, of making the choices of where investments and if investments in the health system are going to be made at the political and the government and the ministry level. So the ministers of health, deputy ministers, and particularly the ministry leaders who are in the provinces responsible for these decisions in the end have been regularly updated on the work and our progress, very supportive of the work. So in a little more detail, how we've gone about this work, we've gone about it to look at four kind of key questions that we need to answer, and then think about how we can implement solutions to what comes out of those questions. One is, how can we optimize the processes that we have in place at the moment that I talked about a little earlier? How can we share information and coordinate in a better and stronger way with respect to the reimbursement decisions that are made, looking at a broader set of inputs and information beyond just the particular evidence and data and information about that drug for that indication for that price, but looking more broadly at the therapies available in a particular area of care, the priorities that we might look at given the opportunities and choices eventually that have to be made with investments in the cancer care system. And to do that, we need to understand what's the framework behind those choices. What is the affordability of these new opportunities for a particular drug, and also this issue that I brought up earlier is how we're going to measure the value that we expect, looking at those priorities, that affordability. How are we going to measure that these drugs are achieving that value in our population, as we might predict based on the evidence we have when we make the decision? So looking at how we can collect that data and evaluate it at points down the line. We're going to look at those four areas in an integrated way, and in an integrated way with our partners, with the existing processes that we have in place. So we're not reinventing a whole process here, but we want to look at how we can put these concepts into this process in a way that's going to be effective and integrate with the current activities. And very importantly, as is in the circle around the outside, we want to make sure that this is done in a transparent way with all of the stakeholders that have an important say and an important contribution in framing how we do that. And that's why we're starting this very important stakeholder engagement today. Just a couple more things about what we'll be doing over the next 12 to 18 months. We will be implementing mechanisms and some additional processes, integrating them within the current processes to look at strengthening this consideration of a broader set of factors into the decision-making process for drug approvals that we hope will be helpful to the provinces, who, of course, will continue to make the ultimate decisions with respect to the approval of these drugs in their provinces, but that we would aim to continue to strengthen and increase our consistency in how we do that across the country, so that it benefits everyone across the country. There'll be some detailed work that will look at those other considerations that are important to bear in mind in terms of the implementation of these new drugs. But one important thing to indicate here is that in order to do this effectively, we recognize that that we mustn't just look at new drugs and new opportunities, but we have to look at it in the context of therapies already available and look at those together. And so that the review of all of these decisions, based on what we hope will be real-world evidence, will take into account all of those factors, and that all of these decisions would end up being reviewable at subsequent times to look at whether those priorities that we stated are still the right ones, and that the mix of opportunities we have with respect to drugs in the system are the right ones for the system at that time. And finally, we're going to try and really nail down what those criteria are going to be that will support this process in a more quantitative way, and in a way that is, we hope, as simple as possible for everyone to understand, so that we might agree on those as the right criteria, and that we can be transparent in understanding how we're all going to be assessing these opportunities against those criteria. As I said earlier, we're already starting work about how we can better do this work around gathering real-world evidence to assess the value of these drugs once they're in use, and that work will continue. Just wanted to mention also that Canadian Partnership Against Cancer has been helping us tremendously, and thank them for that help in supporting another component of this work, which we feel is terrifically important, that as we change our approach to how we approve drugs and introduce them, which is broader and introduces this question of, on a broader set of considerations, what are the choices we might make, that we ask the public in terms of what should be our values in setting those criteria and making those choices. What are the important public values that need to be represented in this work as we establish it and start to implement it, but in an ongoing way, to make sure that the public understands and can support the approach that we're taking, because ultimately all of this work that we're doing and that we do together to develop systems of healthcare and introduce opportunities for patients to have access to good therapies, and that that's at a cost to the healthcare systems. That as we look at how we strengthen that, we bring the public very centrally into understanding how we're doing that. So it's in a way that reflects public values. And CPAC have been helping us with that in terms of understanding what those are with the Canadian Centre for Applied Research in Cancer Control and the McMaster Health Forum, who've done a terrific job in this work, and I hope this will continue in holding forums where we have invited members of the public to weigh in on the questions that we think are going to be generated through this work. And so the final citizen panel out of the initial work was held in October, and we're expecting recommendations shortly that will, I think, shape this work for the future, and I hope will also shape how the public are engaged in an open and transparent way and in an ongoing way in the work. Just lastly, and then I'll hand it back to Heather, we also believe that engaging all stakeholders who are involved in creating these opportunities for patients and implementing them, whether it's patients themselves, industry, clinicians, that all of these very important stakeholders have really important perspectives and can help us together get this right, so that we can do this in an effective way that's going to increase opportunity for patients, but in a way that's going to be sustainable for everybody. And so we're kicking off that process today, and as I say, there'll be opportunity in the future to answer questions, to get feedback. That, I think, with the public deliberative engagement, with the processes that we already have in place, are going to allow us to, I hope, develop a really effective way of being able to strengthen our approach to this across the country. So I'm going to hand it over to Heather, who's just going to finish off, I think, with the engagement process itself, and then we're going to open up for questions and comments.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael, for such a thorough overview of the system, the drug review and approval system in Canada. So I'd like to talk to you about our engagement process. As I said at the very beginning, today marks the start of our engagement process. So phase one, and so this is the start of what we intend to do. Phase one of the process will end in about 3 months. As I'd also mentioned at the beginning, the goal from now until April is to engage patients, patient groups, the pharmaceutical industry, and clinicians across Canada in developing a common understanding of the kind of work that CAPCA is leading, working with our partners, and also to work together to best determine how to integrate the opinions and perspectives of patients and patient groups and other stakeholders in that process as we move towards implementation. So the process has 4 key components. Phase one has 4 key components, which you'll see itemized on the slide. Phase one is today. This is the Introductory Drug Funding Sustainability webinar that CAPCA is hosting. Again, to develop this common understanding of what we're doing and why we feel the need to address sustainability. Phase two is continued online feedback, and that will begin with the survey that I mentioned earlier, that participants, everybody who's registered for this webinar or who registers to listen to the webinar and access it after the fact, will be able to participate in and share questions and thoughts about the information that they're hearing. We encourage you to submit questions through that process, as we will be using those questions to help develop the agendas for the roundtable, which is step 3. So as we get those questions, we will work those into the agendas for each of the 3 separate roundtables we're hosting. So number 3, these are in-person and virtual roundtables. They're smaller, in-depth discussions about specific aspects of our work, including some of the principles and the processes with which we conduct some of the implementation of the Drug Funding Sustainability Initiative, and how we'll do that work going beyond March of this year. And then finally, after the roundtable surveys, so starting really at the beginning and then finishing off phase 1 of our consultation, there'll be another online survey. We will synthesize what we've heard from the process to that point, and often, again, invite people to ask questions of the process or clarify and give us an opportunity to re-engage. So the process will literally span the country. Right now, based on our information to date, we expect to have 3 in-person roundtable sessions, 1 in Vancouver with patients and potentially with industry representatives. That's happening on February 27th. 1 in Toronto with patients and industry representatives, and that's happening on March 2nd. 1 in Montreal, and the date we're confirming that date this week with patients and industry groups. That will be in English. There will be a virtual roundtable in French, and that date has not yet been determined, but will be announced soon. And also potentially a national webinar following the survey. So there are multiple opportunities, not just today, through online and in-person opportunities for people to raise questions about the process and seek clarification, and for us, importantly, to hear directly from you about how to make it resonate with the work that we need to do together for the country. So with closing thoughts, obviously seeking input from patients, patient groups, from clinicians, from people who are dealing with these issues on the front line is critical to ensuring that the final processes and our outcomes meet the needs of the healthcare system. We're taking this work to the Drug Funding Sustainability Initiative. It's an important step. It is an evolutionary process. We're implementing processes now that will evolve based on what we hear from you and our experience. And so hearing from you today is the first step of an important process of engagement. So before we move to questions, I'll moderate the questions. Thank you very much. We've had several of them submitted already. We've had 3 that I'm going to ask if Michael can address, but before he does, I'll let you know what they are, and I'm going to address a question that's come in around clinician engagement. So question number 1 from Michael is, how will we decide what the criteria are for determining if drugs are no longer funded? Number 2, what happens after the consultation wraps up? How will CAPCA share insights and advice with the community and make sure that your voice has been heard? Which patient groups have already been consulted? How do we determine them, and how did individual patients, if at all, get consulted in the process? There's 3 general questions that we've heard. We've seen them from what you submitted online. And as Michael's thinking through the responses to those questions, I'd like to let those who've asked questions about clinician engagement that we do have a parallel and distinct process for clinicians. It is being held after the webinar today. It's scheduled right now for February the 14th from 1:30 to 2:30, and we felt that it was important to make sure that they heard similar content, but had an opportunity to also provide some additional medical advice about some of the decisions and some of the recommendations that may be made through the processes. So it is distinct to the physician community, and again, that's happening in February. We'll be working with our provincial partners to make sure that that information is broadly disseminated, in part through their contacts provincially, but also through the Canadian Association of Medical Oncology. Michael?
Great. Thank you, and thank you for some of the questions already in terms of the themes that are emerging. I'm going to start with the patient question first. And, I think patients are going to be extremely important to shaping this process. This is the stage we're at in terms of engaging patients and patient organizations, and so we haven't kind of selected a group that we've gone out to first and then done this. So we're doing that now, but broadly in terms of engaging patient groups in this work and being able to shape it. So that's going to be very important, and we'll really appreciate feedback from patient representative organizations across the country for different issues with respect to cancer patients, and there are many organizations, as you know. That's going to be a very important part of the process. So that's, we're doing it, if you like, all together, and we're going to invite generally people to participate in this process. One of the issues, how will you decide the criteria for determining which drugs will no longer be funded, was the question put in front of me. A couple of things with the question. It's a bit black and white in terms of whether a drug will be funded or not, and I think there are those key decisions to be made, but there are many more detailed issues in terms of how a drug is funded, what are the specific indications, and there are many factors to look at, and that complexity will continue as part of this whole process. But the idea that we will need, even in this more what will look like might look like a bit more of a complex approach, because it's taking into account a broader set of factors into decision making, will need objective and transparent criteria that people can see and understand. And we don't have all of those fixed yet, and that's very good, because I think that part of the importance of the engagement is to help shape that. We do have a lot of work going on in the background to put forward, looking at best practice across the world, what we know. We have expertise in Canada and across Canada of what some of those considerations should be in terms of what those criteria. And we will be putting those out and having people look at them and saying, yes, that broadly based on what you've shown us looks like a good set of criteria to start with, and we may need to review that down the road and look at how that evolves. But the goal is to have, even in this more complex set of considerations for opportunities for drug approval, that we want to have transparent and objective criteria. We're going to be going through that process, and are in that process now, in terms of putting on the table what those could look like. And I think it's going to be important to get stakeholder engagement, the public values component into, yes, those are good criteria for doing this work. What was kind of implicit in the question around what drugs will no longer be funded, which is, I think the situation will be more complex than that. But I do think the idea that all of these decisions, if we have good data as to the actual effect of those drugs in the population, that we will, of course, together want to review that information. And it may be that that information changes the way that we look at the use of that drug in our systems. It may be that the drug is performing better in some areas and not in others in terms of how it's used. And so we might look at not just broadly whether a drug is funded or not, but how it's used in the population, and therefore how does that influence an agreement, for example, with a pharmaceutical company in terms of the use of that drug in our population. So I think we'll have, both with the criteria and the information, a lot more information, a lot more data, more transparent, where we can look at this together and say, what is the value of that? And therefore, what's the appropriate investment on behalf of the public for that value? And the third was, what happens after this consultation process, and how will CAPCA use that advice? Firstly, we will use it, and we'll use it in a transparent way. So as we get the advice, we'll reflect back what that advice is. As you can imagine, in putting in place a practical approach, not every small piece of advice can be seen in terms of, yes, that's where it is in the final product. But I think what we will and can commit to is to show you what that advice was, what the final product is, at least in starting along this road with this process in Canada, and how that advice broadly is reflected in how we're approaching this, so that everyone can see that in terms of how that shaped what we're doing.
Thank you, Michael. So we've got a couple of other questions come in, a similar theme around the introduction of what sounds like a new process. Can you talk a little bit about whether this is being, will streamline processes? Are there concerns around it delaying getting innovative cancer drugs to patients?
The object of this is to improve access to new and effective therapies for patients. And as you can imagine, the first thing that happens when this challenge that we face gets more and more challenging is delays in access for patients to new effective therapies. So we've recognized as cancer program leaders across the country, with that prospect on the horizon, that we do need a stronger and different approach to this challenge if we are going to provide access in a timely way to new and effective treatments. Now, to do that more broadly, we are going to introduce some new parts of the process, and we're going to and you might think, well, if you're going to introduce new things in the process of getting to decisions and having access in our provinces, that might slow down. So, and we certainly are sensitive that we don't do things that slow down this whole process. So we both want to have a kind of an approach which for the long term and more broadly is going to provide access in the first place to these therapies, but we do it in a way that's efficient as well. And that's why the work with our partners across the country, whether it's CADA, INES, PCPA, in terms of how we're working with national partners, the partners in Quebec, and how that supports the provinces, all of them individually, to make those decisions. We have to do this in an efficient way. So the work in terms of how we're integrating new parts of this process into that existing diagram that I showed you is critical. And so we're doing that work and a lot of engagement with those partners, national, in the provinces, to make sure that this can work effectively. And everyone will be able to see the result of that, because we know how long these processes take now. It'll be quite easy to measure if we're having a good or a bad effect of that. We certainly don't want to have a bad effect of that, but what we do recognize is that the overall effect, we hope, will increase access to new and effective drugs.
Thank you. So we've had a series of questions now around a comment that was made earlier around the use of clinical algorithms. So what would happen when a new drug comes through the system is an ability now to address the gap where drugs are looked at on a one-off basis rather than within, for example, a disease site space. So you're looking at all the drugs in the system. Can you talk about what role that might play in standardization, if any?
Yes, I think it goes back to when we identified where are the opportunities to strengthen this process from what we have now. And one of the areas, and we addressed the issue of lack of real-world evidence as one of them. And the other area we addressed earlier on was this issue that largely the drugs and their indications and effectiveness, cost-effectiveness, and then negotiation and approval is done in a fairly narrow way around that drug for that indication. So when these opportunities come up, we have felt that a broader look at what the opportunities for patients for a particular type of cancer have now, how this drug for this indication fits in to the overall approach for those patients across the country is going to be affected by this decision to introduce this new drug, what it means more broadly, that we could strengthen the process by having more of that consideration as part of the process. So this looking with that drug for that indication for a particular type of cancer in the context of the overall approach that we have in the provinces to that type of cancer and the therapeutic opportunities available, that we need to introduce mechanisms to make sure that that deliberation can be used as an important input as to the importance of making that drug available for that indication and the type of value we might expect in the context of the approach to that particular cancer that we have at the moment. So that kind of looking at that information, we think will be important, not only in terms of the decision, but how we can approach in a more consistent way the use of that drug in that population across the country. Because one of the things that we do know is that when we do this in a narrower way around the drug for the indication at a price we know, which you might think would be quite precise in terms of that's how it's going to be used, but we know it's not very precise in the end in terms of how that is actually used in patients across the country to a greater or lesser degree. And we do think that there's opportunity for more standardization in terms of understanding where the best value for these drugs are by taking that information in, analyzing it, considering it, and then saying more precisely how this can be used, how we think it will be effective, and then monitoring that, as I say, with real-world evidence.
Thank you. So along the same lines, a question that was submitted, I think in response to a comment early on about one of the challenges in the system, where drugs will come in and they're reviewed individually, and then the provinces would consider them individually, which in the question has been described as a first-in, first-out problem. Do you expect that the Drug Funding Sustainability Initiative and its work specifically will begin to address that?
Largely, yes. This will, I think the issue of looking at individual drug indications and their negotiation on a kind of sequential basis when they arrive, understanding that we have good processes, I think, in place for how those come forward, that you know, whether a particular drug for a particular indication comes now as opposed to next week shouldn't be a deciding factor on whether a drug is actually provided across our provinces. If another drug had come last week, you know, does that change the picture? And so I think that picture will change a little bit. Clearly, we want organized and sensible processes for bringing opportunities forward in a way that supports timeliness and supports high quality applications or bringing forward of those opportunities. But I think this idea that we will be looking at a broader set of considerations means that both the kind of narrower consideration of these drug indications, not only in terms of what they're used for, but when exactly they're coming forward, has to be considered. And we have good information about the pipeline. We have good information on when things might be available in different areas, different cancers. And I think that this will provide an opportunity to look at that again a bit more broadly over time, as well as for the specificity of how the drug is actually used. So I do expect that we will, as we go down this road, you know, this idea of the first in, first out, we will review together and say, is that the most sensible way to look at that? So again, this will be important to get your feedback, to make sure that we do things in a timely way. But as I say, look at a broader set of considerations as well as that information.
Thank you. So for those on the line, thank you for continuing to submit your questions. We have many, many more questions than we'll be able to answer today. But please do continue to submit them. We're tracking them. We'll use them in helping to shape what comes from here. And within that, I guess within that theme, for the roundtables that are coming, are you looking, we've had people ask, are we looking for new ideas, or are we coming forward with a plan and asking people just to react to it? How much opportunity is there to actually influence?
It's a bit of both, I would say. I mean, we've deliberately put something on the table here in terms of how we think, or what we think the important components of this work are. And that has been based on a lot of consideration. So we haven't kind of put a blank sheet of paper and say, how do we address this challenge? We put something on the table, but it certainly we're engaging you because we do want you to influence it. So if there are good ideas about how to do that, or even whatever feedback you'd like to provide, if you think some components are more important than others, or how we stage the kind of bringing in of these components, all of that, I think we're looking for your feedback on. So with all of these things, I think for us to be effective together, it's going to be a little bit iterative, so that we can get the best advice, shape that proposal, if you like, as to how we're doing this. And then, of course, I think we'll all want to see how this works once we are implementing it, and that will be transparent to everyone, and then reviewing and shaping it further down the road. So I expect this will be a first way of shaping it, and if it's effective and delivers, is able to help the provinces deliver better value for the public and patients, then we'll measure that, and we'll continue to get feedback and hopefully get this stronger and stronger.
Thank you. And as a final question before closing remarks, Michael, you've led the biggest province in Canada's cancer system for a number of years and have been very actively leading this work for CAPCA. I wonder if you can give some thoughts to what you think success is going to look like. How will we know when we're really starting to change the system in a very positive way for patients and getting innovative medicines to them?
I'll just go back to the thought that I touched on earlier, that we're very keen as cancer program leaders and CAPCA that we provide in Canada the best care in the world. But we know that, to be able to do that, we have to have a very strong approach to making sure that when we try and convince governments and the public of the investments that are required to do that, that we are also showing them that we're providing the best possible value for those investments for the public in our provinces and across Canada. And I think we have recognized, and we're not the only jurisdiction, many jurisdictions are looking at this challenge in front of them with some similar types of approach and that we can learn from. But saying that if we're going to continue to be able to make the case to the public and to governments for those investments, that we do need to strengthen our approach to this challenge going forward. Then, in that context, and I can certainly say this in Ontario, I suspect it's reflected not only across Canada but across many jurisdictions, that in some senses we have been fortunate in developing and implementing high quality health systems for patients at risk for and developing cancer in those jurisdictions. In some senses, and for good reason, we've had a bit of a special place, because everyone, broadly, I think in the public, and we know this in our personal lives, recognizes the challenge that we face from cancer in our societies, and the need to do all that we can to make sure that we reduce the burden of cancer. And so governments and the public have been willing to make those investments. And we've been fortunate that we've been able to make those cases. Those investments have come, and we have generally strong systems in place that many other parts of the health systems or patients with other needs maybe don't have. And so I think it's doubly important that we continue to be able to show that the value of those investments is absolutely reflected in the experience and outcomes for patients. And that's what this is about. It's about making sure that we continue we can continue to be able to provide the terrific opportunities that are coming out of research and innovation, leading to new knowledge and its implementation for patients and families. And we can only do this together with everyone involved, whether it's patient groups, industry, clinicians, health system leaders, and national partners. The only way we will be successful in doing this is if we do it all together. We find ways to strengthen this approach. Then I think we absolutely can continue on this road in a very effective way of making sure that we reduce the burden of cancer as much as possible.
That's an inspiring note to end on a very complicated and difficult and personal issue for many Canadians. So that concludes our webinar for today. Before we close, just a few reminders. Number one, you will receive, if you've registered, a link to the recorded webinar so you can listen to it. Other people who would like to listen to it need to register, and they will be given access as well. You also will be given a survey link to continue to share your thoughts leading to the roundtables and beyond that. If you're unable to use the survey that we send out, you can send questions to an email address that is dffenquiries@capca.ca, and we'll make sure you get that in the email that goes out. And we may not respond to every single email that comes in, but we will read everyone and consider them and incorporate as many as we can into the roundtable agenda and our work going forward. And then as a very final note, thank you very much for your time and the time of our partners today, and for all of the work that's happening to make this a better system on behalf of Canadians.